मैं सभी अतिथियों से अनुरोध करता हूं कि मंच पर अपना स्थान ग्रहण करें। We have with us IMC faculty and all the students, Professor Sunetra Sen Narayan, Professor Sangeeta Panavendra, Dr. Rachana Sharma, Dr. Rakesh Upadhyay, Dr. Pawan Kondal, Professor Virendra Bharti ji, and we also have some staff members from Organizer Weekly. Friends, this event is part of the Friday Dialogue series that was started in IIMC in December 2020. It was the idea of DG IMC Professor Sanjay Dwivedi to provide out of classroom perspective to students on the issues and topics that are not discussed normally in the classroom. We have sessions on every Friday, and we have fixed time also, 2:30 to 4. And for this batch, current batch, the admission process is still going on. This is the first Friday dialogue for this batch. And I'm happy that this Friday dialogue series for this current batch is beginning with the tribute to an eminent journalist who edited a particular newspaper, Organizer Weekly, for 35 years. He started his career in journalism from Hindustan Times in 1947, and he joined Organizer in 1948. And up to 1983, he edited not only the Organizer Weekly, but also a daily newspaper, The Motherland. Also Hindi weekly, Panchjanna. Also an afternoon newspaper, The Motherland, that was started during 1971. Malkani ji was basically born in Sindh, now in Pakistan, and he had his education in India, and he was also Rajya Sabha MP and then Governor of Pondicherry, and he passed away in 2003. With this note, I request DG IMC Professor Sanjay Dwivedi ji to please felicitate all the guests with a plant and also IMC publications. I request DG IMC to please welcome Shri Swapan Das Gupta, eminent journalist who has worked with Times of India. He writes column in different newspapers. I request Professor Dwivedi to please welcome Shri Prafulla Ketkar. Shri Prafulla Ketkar he has been JNU student, and he taught at a college for some time, and he is editing Organizer Weekly since the year 2013. I request DG IMC to please also felicitate Govind Singh ji. Then I request Professor Govind Singh ji to please felicitate DG IMC Professor Sanjay Dwivedi with a plant. Now I request DG IMC Professor Sanjay Dwivedi to please deliver welcome speech. Professor Dwivedi.
सबसे पहले तो हमारे इस साल जिन विद्यार्थियों ने इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ मास कम्युनिकेशन में प्रवेश लिया है, उन सबको मैं बधाई देता हूं, शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। मेरी आपसे पहली मुलाकात है और बहुत ही अच्छा मौका है। कितने बड़े जर्नलिस्ट जिन्होंने आज़ादी के मोमेंट से लेके एक बनता हुआ बदलता हुआ भारत देखा, उनकी स्मृति से हम इस शुक्रवार संवाद की शुरुआत कर रहे हैं। आज के इस कार्यक्रम के माननीय मुख्य अतिथि देश के यशस्वी पत्रकार, टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया जैसे बहुत बड़े समाचार पत्र के संपादक रहे, राज्यसभा के माननीय सदस्य श्री स्वपन दास गुप्ता जी, आदरणीय श्री प्रफुल्ल केतकर जी, जिनकी प्रेरणा से, जिनके मार्गदर्शन से हम इस कार्य को कर पा रहे हैं, आदरणीय प्रोफेसर गोविंद सिंह जी, प्रोफेसर वी के भारती जी, प्रमोद जी, सुनेत्रा जी, संगीता जी, रचना जी, राकेश जी, पवन कुंडल और संस्थान के सभी कर्मचारी अधिकारीगण। के.आर. मलकानी को याद करना सच में अपने उस पुरखे को याद करना है जिसने हमें रास्ता दिखाया कि जर्नलिज्म क्यों करना चाहिए और किस तरह करना चाहिए। बहुत लोग काम करते हैं, अलग अलग क्षेत्रों में काम करते हैं, लेकिन कुछ लोग ऐसे होते हैं जिनकी जिंदगी एक मिसाल बन जाती है और उनके विचार मसाल बन जाते हैं, जो पूरी जिंदगी रास्ता दिखाते हैं और न रहने पे भी उनकी जो विचारों की जो आग है, उनका जो किया हुआ काम है, वो देर तक और दूर तक हमको याद रहता है। मलकानी साहब उन लोगों में थे। मुल्क के बंटवारे के बाद आपको पता है तमाम लोगों की तरह वो भी हिंदुस्तान आए। अब आप कल्पना करिए उस आदमी की। मैं तो कई बार सोचता हूं कि एक जिंदगी में भी लोगों ने 3-3 मुल्क देखे हैं। जिंदगी कितनी कठिन होती है। आप सोचिए 47 में पैदा हुए उस हिंदुस्तानी की, या 47 में जवान हो रहे हिंदुस्तानी की, जो पैदा तो हो रहा है हिंदुस्तान में, उसके बाद वो सांसें ले रहा है पाकिस्तान में, और उसके बाद वो अपनी जवानी जो है या बुढ़ापा पूरा कर रहा है बांग्लादेश में। ये एक मुल्क की भी त्रासदी है और एक उस नागरिक की भी त्रासदी है। एक राष्ट्रीयता के नाते, एक भूगोल के नाते जब जमीन के टुकड़े होते हैं तो जो कत्लो गारद होता है, जो शिफ्टिंग होती है आबादी की, प्रॉपर्टीज की, वो तो है ही। पर कितने दिल टूट जाते हैं अपनी जमीन को छोड़ना, अपनी जमीन को छोड़कर विस्थापित होना, उसके बाद नए स्थान पर जाकर स्थापित होना और वहां के लोगों के साथ मिलकर के एक पहचान बनाना। मलकानी साहब ने वो काम किया कि वो आए और उन्होंने हिंदुस्तान की जर्नलिज्म में जो काम किया है वो अपने आप में मिसाल है, और इसलिए उनकी स्मृति में देश भर में आयोजन हो रहे हैं। कल भी दिल्ली में एक आयोजन होने वाला है, इसके पहले भी एक आयोजन हो चुका है, पर हम क्योंकि जर्नलिज्म और मास कम्युनिकेशन के सर्वश्रेष्ठ संस्थान है और हमारी ये जरूरत है और हमारा एक कर्तव्य भी है, रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हमारी है कि हम ऐसे उन सारे लोगों को याद करें जिन्होंने हिंदुस्तान के जर्नलिज्म को, जिन्होंने हिंदुस्तान की पत्रकारिता को एक मकाम पे लाके खड़ा किया, और मलकानी साहब उन लोगों में थे। इसलिए मलकानी साहब को जब आप पढ़ेंगे तो आप देखेंगे उस व्यक्ति में कितनी बेचैनियां हैं एक सुंदर भारत बनाने की, एक भारत बनाने की, श्रेष्ठ भारत बनाने की। उनका पूरा लेखन आम आदमी को न्याय दिलाने की भावना से भरा हुआ है। इमरजेंसी के दिनों में जिस तरह उन्होंने आपातकाल के विरुद्ध तन करके वो खड़े रहे, समझौता नहीं किया। हम जरा जरा से समझौतों से, जरा जरा सी परेशानियों से टूट जाते हैं। मलकानी साहब जैसे लोगों ने बताया कि पत्रकारिता करने वाले व्यक्ति की रीढ़ कैसी होनी चाहिए, कितनी मजबूत होनी चाहिए, और इस नाते आज हम उन्हें याद कर रहे हैं। आदरणीय स्वपन दास गुप्ता जी जब बोलेंगे, प्रफुल्ल जी जब बताएंगे, तो हमें पता चलेगा कि एक इंसान कैसे बनता है। और ये आपका भी जो वक्त है, ये वास्तव में आपका टाइम है आपके बनने का। और आने वाली 21 से 25 तारीख तक 5 दिनों तक आपका ओरिएंटेशन का प्रोग्राम चलेगा, जिसको हमने 17 रंग नाम दिया हिंदी में। 5 दिन में करीब जो है 50 के आसपास विद्वान आपसे बात करेंगे, अलग अलग विषयों पे बात करेंगे। और आपके सामने एक जो बड़ा विजन है मुल्क का, हिंदुस्तान को बड़ा करने का, खड़ा करने का। इसलिए हमने इसको अमृत महोत्सव के संकल्पों से जोड़ा है और उन सारी चर्चाओं में आप जरूर हिस्सा लीजिए। ये शुक्रवार संवाद तो चले गए, तो हर शुक्रवार होगा ही होगा। और शुक्रवार संवाद की खूबी है, शुक्रवार संवाद में देश के वरिष्ठतम पत्रकार गण ही नहीं आते, बल्कि समाज जीवन के हर क्षेत्र में जिन्होंने बड़ा काम किया, वो आर्ट के लोग हैं, कल्चर के लोग हैं, सिनेमा के लोग हैं। हम ये नहीं मानते कि मीडिया पूरी दुनिया है। मीडिया तो दुनिया को कवर करने वाली बहुत छोटी सी दुनिया है। इसलिए हमें सब चीजों पे ध्यान रखना है। इसलिए विविध क्षेत्रों के लोग, अलग अलग क्षेत्रों में काम करने वाले लोग शुक्रवार के दिन आपसे बातचीत करते हैं। और ये शुक्रवार संवाद की शुरुआत इतने महान व्यक्ति के नाम पे हो रही है और स्वप्नदास गुप्ता जी की उपस्थिति में हो रही है। मैं इसको अपना सौभाग्य मानता हूं, क्योंकि हिंदी पत्रकारिता में, भारतीय पत्रकारिता में जब बहुत ही श्रेष्ठ संपादकों की सूची बनाई जाएगी, श्रेष्ठतम संपादकों की सूची बनाई जाएगी, वो स्वप्नदास गुप्ता जी के बिना पूरी नहीं होगी। ये मैं आपसे कहना चाहता हूं। वो आज हमारे साथ बैठे हैं, ये हमारी किस्मत है, हमारा भाग्य है। और वो इस नाते भी यहां आए हैं कि इस कार्यक्रम के साथ मलकानी जी का नाम जुड़ा हुआ है। इसलिए विशेष तौर पे उन्होंने अपना वक्त हमारे लिए निकाला है, अपना समय हमारे लिए निकाला है। आज के इस मौके पर वो ज्यादा कहें, हम उन्हें ज्यादा सुने, और जाकर के जो उन्होंने कहा होगा, जो वो कहेंगे, उसको जाके अपने, जब हम एकांत में हों तो उन विचारों के बारे में, उन थॉट्स के बारे में सोचें और देखें कि इस समय में हमारा कंट्रीब्यूशन क्या हो सकता है। एक जर्नलिज्म को जिस जगह पे मलकानी साहब ने छोड़ा, जिस जगह पे स्वपनदास गुप्ता ने छोड़ा, जिस जगह पे हमारे सीनियर्स ने उस जर्नलिज्म को छोड़ा है, वहां से इस चीज को हमको आगे लेके जाना है। और इस नाते बहुत बड़ी जिम्मेदारी आपकी है। हिंदुस्तान में मीडिया के ग्लोबल लीडर्स खड़े करने की जिम्मेदारी इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट मास कम्युनिकेशन की है, और वो हम पूरी नहीं करेंगे, आप पूरी करेंगे। आपके चमकते चेहरे, आपका जोश, आपकी जो एनर्जी है, और जिस बड़ी परीक्षा को करके आप यहां तक पहुंचे हैं, मुझे उम्मीद है कि आप उस सपने को पूरा जरूर करेंगे। और मुझे लगता है जब आप वो कर रहे होंगे तो मलकानी जैसी तमाम आत्माएं ऊपर से आपको आशीर्वाद दे रही होंगी। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, नमस्कार।
थैंक यू सर। के.आर. मलकानी जी का ये जन्म शताब्दी वर्ष है। कल उनका जन्मदिन है। उनके जन्मदिन की पूर्व संध्या पर हम ये आयोजन कर रहे हैं। 1950 में जब हमारा संविधान लागू हुआ, 26 जनवरी, उसके बाद फरवरी मार्च में वो घटनाएं घटी जिसके कारण मलकानी जी के लेखन पर सेंसरशिप लगाई गई। वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट गए और सुप्रीम कोर्ट से केस जीते, यानी भारत में मीडिया की जो आज़ादी है उसके सबसे पहले योद्धा स्वतंत्र भारत में हैं मलकानी जी। नेहरू जी ने एक बार मलकानी जी को कहा था, एक टिप्पणी की थी, एग्जैक्ट वर्ड नहीं बता रहा हूं, अनुवाद बता रहा हूं, कि मैं ऑर्गेनाइजर के हर इशू की प्रतीक्षा करता हूं यह जानने के लिए कि मेरे खिलाफ लेटेस्ट क्रिटिसिज्म क्या है। और यही कारण है कि चाहे नेहरू जी हों, चाहे श्रीमती इंदिरा गांधी हो, ऑर्गेनाइजर का इशू पब्लिश होते ही सबसे पहले, अगर वो विदेश में भी है तो एकदम लेटेस्ट अवेलेबल फ्लाइट से ऑर्गेनाइजर का इशू उन्हें उपलब्ध कराया जाता था। दिस हैज बीन द क्रेडिबिलिटी ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइजर वीकली। एंड श्री के.आर. मलकानी एडिटेड दैट न्यूज़पेपर फॉर 34 ईयर्स। 1947 में जब वो हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स छोड़कर ऑर्गेनाइजर में आए थे, उस समय उन्हें पता था कि उनके सामने कितना प्रोमिसिंग कैरियर है। इफ he was associated, if he continued his services with Hindustan Times, you can imagine जर्नलिज्म में वो कितनी ऊंचाई पर जाते हैं। लेकिन उन्होंने किसी चीज की परवाह नहीं की। He joined organizer and edited that newspaper for 34 years, including Panchajanya, the motherland also. And because of the vigil, you can say, on organizer and the writings of K.R. Malkani, K.R. Malkani was first person to be arrested when the emergency was imposed in the country at the midnight of June 25, 1975. Police raided the residence of K.R. Malkani at 1 a.m. और मलकानी जी को सबसे बाद में, इलेक्शन के बाद, रिजल्ट आने के बाद सबसे बाद लास्ट में उन्हें रिलीज किया गया। तो ऐसे योद्धा, पत्रकार को, संपादक को नमन करते हुए, अपनी श्रद्धांजलि देते हुए हम ये फ्राइडे डायलॉग शुरू कर रहे हैं। बातचीत को आगे बढ़ाने से पहले मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा हमारे मंच पर जितने भी अतिथि हैं, के.आर. मलकानी की कुछ राइटिंग्स, द एडिटोरियल्स दैट ही हैज रिटन फॉर ऑर्गेनाइजर, उन्हें कंपाइल करके एक बुक तैयार हुई है। मैं सभी से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि वो बुक रिलीज करें। द टाइटल ऑफ द बुक इज के.आर. मलकानी, द फ्री प्रेस वॉरियर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंट इंडिया। देन प्रफुल्ल केतकर जी विल एलेबोरेट दिस बुक। Thank you, sir. Now I request Shri Prafull Ketkar ji to please share his thoughts.
Chair of today's session, respected Professor Sanjay Dwivedi ji, who is DG IMC, friend, guide, a thought leader, respected Swapanda, Professor Govind ji, other faculty members of IMC, and my dear friends. I'm really thankful to the Indian Institute of Mass Communication for collaborating with organizer in having this program with you. Because we are going a different kind of media revolution these days. And there is a lot of debate about free speech, free press. And this entire discourse, you might have rarely heard a name called Keval Ram Malkani. मतलब भारत में फ्री स्पीच और फ्री प्रेस पर जिनके एडिटोरियल के कारण डिबेट शुरू हुआ इंडिपेंडेंट इंडिया में, जिनके कारण भारत की सरकार को फर्स्ट अमेंडमेंट में रीजनेबल रिस्ट्रिक्शंस लगवाने पड़े, उन के.आर. मलकानी का नाम फ्री स्पीच डिबेट में कहीं पे नहीं आता है। What was the reason? What was his thought behind his entire struggle through organizer, motherland, later even a quarterly magazine, research magazine called Manthan, which was published from Deen Dayal Research Institute. He was editor there also. He later formally joined BJP and became vice president and main spokesperson. I remember in my students' days, if there was one prominent voice in English who would articulate thoughts about Hindutva or Ram Janmabhoomi movement, it was only K.R. Malkani. But there was a consistent thinking behind his editorial, and that's why we decided to bring out his select editorials and the experiences of the people who have worked with him. Right from the constitution making process to the various issues that we face as a nation in the post-independent period, if you really want to understand the political history and the dialogue that was happening on various issues in independent India, then referring to K.R. Malkani is inevitable. On the one hand, till the constitution is enacted, he is consistently arguing for Indian model of governance. The day Constitution was adopted, he has written one beautiful editorial called Republic. Before that, he is writing introspect and retrospect. His editorial on Kashmir, titled Our Kashmir, is still a guiding force in our foreign policy towards Pakistan. In fact, the day Jawaharlal Nehru decided to approach United Nations, Malkani ji wrote that editorial and warned him that you are inviting a third-party intervention, which is not even a bilateral issue, but the internal issue of India. As Pramod ji rightly said, there is very interesting anecdote I came to know, in fact, couple of them. First of all, his father, Professor H.R. Malkani, was a very prominent Congress leader from Sindh. And from him, Malkani ji got the orientation about the entire national movement and freedom struggle. But his elder brother, Malkani ji had education from Ferguson College, almost all prestigious institutions of India. But he chose, there were options, but he chose journalism as a career. It was his choice, not compulsion. आजकल तो हम बहुत सारे लोगों को, मैं जब यंग स्टूडेंट्स को मिलता हूं तो जनरली उनके सामने इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया के फेसेस होते हैं आइकॉन्स के रूप में. उस समय तो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया नहीं था. बट स्टिल मलकानी जी चोज टू बी अ जर्नलिस्ट. हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स से करियर शुरू कहा और प्रमोद जी ने जैसे कहा कि इट वुड हैव बीन अ वेरी लुक्रेटिव करियर, बट ही डिसाइडेड टू डू अ डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ जर्नलिज्म. आप लोग अभी जैसे जैसे कोर्स में आगे बढ़ेंगे तो आपको ये वर्ड सुनने को मिलेंगे कि मेन स्ट्रीम जर्नलिज्म, आइडियोलॉजिकल जर्नलिज्म. I personally feel that all media houses, all journalists have their own ideological inclinations. Some openly say it, some don't accept it. An idea that was started in 1946 in the form of Bharat Prakashan, Organizer Weekly, was published from Delhi and largely considered as, representing not just RSS point of view, but alternative point of view from the Congress. Because for many years, even thought leaders, politicians from various ideological backgrounds, including Ram Manohar Lohia, S.A. Dange, everybody wrote through Organizer. एक अलग कंपनी थी जिसमें कोई कॉर्पोरेट हाउस का इन्वेस्टमेंट नहीं था, किसी इंडिविजुअल की ओनरशिप नहीं थी. 15,000 शेयर होल्डर्स थे, कॉमन मैन शेयर होल्डर्स थे, जिनके द्वारा एक कंपनी शुरू हुई थी, मीडिया कंपनी. मलकानी जी को जब ये ऑफर दिया गया हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स में, उनको लगा कि मैं कुछ विषयों पर नहीं लिख पा रहा हूं. एंड द बिगेस्ट परहैप्स द issue that guided his entire career of journalism was the partition of India. 6 लगातार एडिटोरियल लिखे मलकानी जी ने. One of them was so scathing with lot of cartoons attacking Pandit Nehru, which led to imposition of first ever censorship on any publication in India in November 1949. Constitution was not even fully enacted. The case went to High Court. High Court upheld the censorship. There was another publication which was more inclined to the communist ideology called Crossroads, and Ramesh Thapar was editing that. Both the journalists fought the case in the Supreme Court. And the issues that were raised by Malkani ji were not dealt by any other so-called mainstream journalism. And the issue was the plight of people who are migrating from East and West Pakistan and the refugee policy of independent India. कहां से उन्होंने रिसोर्सेज बनाए, क्या सोर्सेस उनके थे, मुझे पता नहीं है, but there are first hand stories of the victims from both Bengal and Punjab and Jammu Kashmir side. Double migration that took place first from present day Pakistan to present day Pak occupied Jammu Kashmir, and from Pak occupied Jammu Kashmir to Jammu and Punjab. And it was Malkani who was consistently raising questions about this. Nehru government was taken aback by this. The censorship went on for almost 6 months. Everybody talks about the spirit that had shown by Indian Express during emergency. But I could see at least 33 editorials of Malkani ji which he had stored, but because of censorship which could not be published, and he used a Caesar there and wrote censor Caesar. He didn't allow his editorial to go blank. कैंची का एक निशान लगाकर ये मैंने नहीं खाली छोड़ा है, ये सेंसर के वजह से खाली जा रहा है, ये उन्होंने पाठकों को एहसास कराया. उसके बाद जम्मू कश्मीर का प्रजा परिषद का आंदोलन शुरू हुआ. ऑर्गेनाइजर वर्चुअली बिकेम अ वॉइस ऑफ इंडिजिनस पीपल ऑफ जम्मू एंड कश्मीर अगेंस्ट द पाकिस्तानी एग्रेशन. श्यामा प्रसाद मुखर्जी का बलिदान हुआ. ऑर्गेनाइजर वॉज द पब्लिकेशन, and that was, I believe that it was because of Malkani that organizer could get. It was a rare kind of, situation where a publication was virtually identified with a person. और हर बार हमको यह दिखता है वेरी क्लियर अबाउट द लाइन ही इज टेकिंग ऑन वेरियस इश्यूज. इफ यू रीड हिज बुक, ही वॉज अ ग्रेट ऑथर ऑल्सो. हिज बुक कॉल्ड पॉलिटिकल मिस्ट्रीज. भारत के स्वतंत्र भारत की जितनी मिस्ट्रीज है, पॉलिटिकल मिस्ट्रीज, चाहे वो श्यामा प्रसाद मुखर्जी का बलिदान हो, चाहे वो लाल बहादुर शास्त्री जी की रशिया में संदिग्ध तरीके से हुई मौत हो, चाहे वो दीनदयाल उपाध्याय जी का मृत्यु हो, जो रेलवे में जाते हुए उनका शव अचानक मिला था, इन सब पर एक कंसिस्टेंट इन्वेस्टिगेटिव जर्नलिज्म मलकानी जी ने किया है. एंड 71 में जब मदरलैंड शुरू हुआ, somewhere in 73-74 he started writing about the idea of national emergency, and that's how he came under radar of Mrs. Gandhi. नेहरू जी के तो वो पहले से थे ही, लेकिन नेहरू जी के बाद श्रीमती गांधी के रडार पर वो आए 72-73 में, और तब से ही वॉज कंसिस्टेंटली अंडर वॉच, and as Pramod ji rightly pointed out, he was the first person to get arrested when emergency was proclaimed. एक another important controversy हुई थी. संजय खान ने एक सीरीज बनाई थी टीपू सुल्तान नाम से. I am giving the other side of Malkani, how committed he was to the free speech. यह आई थी जब केंद्र में अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी प्रधानमंत्री थे. एंड द स्वॉर्ड ऑफ टीपू सुल्तान, ये सीरियल थी, संजय खान ने बनाई थी. एंड देयर वॉज अ कॉन्ट्रोवर्सी अराउंड दैट एंटायर सीरीज. अभी भी है टीपू सुल्तान के बारे में. टीपू सुल्तान इज अ फाइटर who fought against the British, or he was a fanatic bigot who killed many Hindus. There are different versions about this. So Tipu Sultan should be considered as a national hero or not. That was the debate going on. INB ministry decided to form a one-man committee. They appointed Malkani ji as the head. Malkani ji called some more people and decided to watch the movie. Entire series. After watching 8 episodes, he gave a green signal to the sword of Tipu Sultan. There was a lot of uproar, controversy. Even the people who were admirers of K.R. Malkani, they questioned it. Why Malkani ji decided to give a green signal? Malkani ji interestingly wrote one important book which is not discussed much. It is on Hindu-Muslim dialogue. Because he had seen, as I said, partition was one issue that always, and his last book is India First. There is an evolution of thought we can see in Malkani ji's writings. But there was one consistent guiding force. And he gave that clarification while giving clearance to Sanjay Khan's Tipu Sultan. He said Sanjay Khan has openly accepted that this is based on a fictional novel written by Mr. Gidwani and not based on all historical facts. 2, whatever may be the other side of Tipu Sultan, it is a fact that Tipu Sultan bravely fought against the British. On the basis of these 2 justifications, he said, I believe Sanjay Khan has a right to make a series on Tipu Sultan as his free speech and creativity. So it was not, he said, I will write against this series. I will write against Tipu Sultan. He had written against Tipu Sultan. But he defended the right of Sanjay Khan to make a series on Tipu Sultan. And that's why I decided to title this book as The Free Speech Warrior. He didn't fight for his own free speech. He fought for the issues that mattered to the nation in those days. चाहे गोरक्षा का आंदोलन चला, चाहे स्वदेशी का आंदोलन चला, इस पर सबसे ज्यादा मुखर होकर भूमिका लेने वालों में से एक मलकानी जी थे. And as I said, if there is one thought that was guiding him, if somebody asked me what was that, at one place he has quoted Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. And I believe that irrespective of whatever our career is, whatever we do in life, this thought can be a guiding force. Malkani ji has quoted this. There was one debate going on about press bill. Tripudaman has written one book on those 15 days about when the amendment, first amendment was going on and the debate was going on in the parliament. फ्री स्पीच के ऊपर पहले जो रिस्ट्रिक्शन लगे वो फर्स्ट अमेंडमेंट के कारण लगे और उस समय मलकानी जी लिखते हैं, कोट करते हैं श्यामा प्रसाद मुखर्जी को, एज आई सेड इट इज नॉट अ प्रेस लॉ दैट समथिंग इज इन डेंजर and so you must go and pass the press law somehow and operate it. This is not an amendment of the constitution. It is not a political matter. In fact, we may differ on matters of politics. But there should be a fundamental agreement with regard to the need for introducing reforms into our great country which will make our civilization more progressive and more advanced. That should be our common ground of approach. मतभेद होंगे, मतभिन्नता होगी, लेकिन उनका स्वीकार करते हुए भी देयर शुड बी सम कॉमन ग्राउंड अबाउट हु वी आर, व्हाट वी वांट टू अचीव एज अ नेशन. उस दायरे में रखकर सारा फ्री स्पीच एक्सेप्टेबल है. आई थिंक व्हेन टुडे वी आर डिस्कसिंग about entire free speech and free press controversy, we have recently witnessed one wire versus meta debate. We have seen many journalists getting arrested in Chhattisgarh, in Maharashtra, in Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, Bengal, on various grounds. If there is one testing ground on the basis of which we should judge the thin line between the freedom and responsibility of being a journalist, then Malkani ji certainly provide a light, a clear-cut direction about what should be our approach in dealing with these issues, right from the partition to rehabilitation of refugees up to Rama Janmabhoomi movement. On various issues he had taken a certain stand, and if we look at it today, then we feel we can understand through his editorials that his line of thinking is turning out to be true, and that is why I thought this visionary journalist should be celebrated as a free speech warrior. I must thank my team members, especially Yatharth and Dipti, who it was going through all those archives and taking out relevant articles was not an easy task. Then my predecessors, whether Sheshadri Chari or Balashankar, all of them helped in getting right people who had worked with Malkani ji and to write about Malkani ji. This is not about organizer, this is not about Malkani ji. This is about the way India's post-independent political discourse was shaped through journalism. And in that sense, I would request all of you to peep into what Malkani ji was trying to articulate through his editorials and articles. And I'm sure that will give you fresh understanding of even contemporary discourse and understanding of political issues. Again, I thank IIMC for allowing this to happen on this Friday dialogue, and I wish all of you will get inspiration from this kind of discussion and help you in contributing to the national discourse in a meaningful way. I hope, I'm sure Swapanda will provide much more light on the present discourse about free speech, the limitations as well as the extent, and that will give you, a lifelong direction in your journalistic career. I wish you all the best on this occasion. My humble tribute to the memory of Shri K.R. Malkani. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Praful ji. Malkani was organizer was Malkani. ये एक संपादक और अखबार का इतना गहरा संबंध, यानी दोनों एक दूसरे से, मलकानी की पहचान ऑर्गेनाइजर और ऑर्गेनाइजर की पहचान मलकानी, ये उनकी आइडेंटिटी थी. वी शुड सेलिब्रेट हिम एज ए वॉरियर ऑफ फ्री स्पीच इन इंडिया. मलकानी जी को और बेहतर समझने के लिए आप सोचिए कि जिस व्यक्ति ने उनके साथ लंबा समय गुजारा, उनके साथ रहे, उनसे डिस्कशन करने का मौका मिला बहुत लंबे समय तक, ऐसे हमारे साथ श्री स्वपन दास गुप्ता जी हैं. नाउ आई हम्बली रिक्वेस्ट स्वपन दास गुप्ता जी टू प्लीज शेयर हिज थॉट्स. श्री स्वपन दास जी.
My friend Praful Ketkar, Govindji, other faculty members of IIMC and students. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I must confess I was not prepared to see such an elaborate occasion such as this. But nevertheless, it's only right that at some point we remember K.R. Malkani, we remember his contribution, and we remember the man for what he was. I personally encountered Malkani ji more when he had already assumed the role of a politician. And I must say that he was a far more successful journalist than he was a politician. Partly because Malkani ji was he had a short fuse. And a short fuse you could manage as an editor. But a short fuse is not something which in politics you can handle very well. Nevertheless, what was very nice about Malkani ji was, number one, his civility, his courtesy, his very old world charm, very, very old world charm. It belonged to another generation, another age altogether. And the fact that sometimes he could be very stubborn when it came to his beliefs. I remember during the time of the liberalization debate in Advani ji's house, we had various meetings. At that time, one of the big questions of the day was foreign investment in media. Now, today, foreign investment in media, some of it has got automatic route is 26%. I think in certain specialized publications it's 100%. And I think for digital it's also 26%. But anyway, certain norms have been crafted out. But at that time, there was a big, huge sort of discussion and debate on the very question of how much, whether at all it should be allowed. Malkani ji had a particular point of view which was against allowing anything. And I had a point of view which said we need it for the survival of it. Anyway, we clashed in a good-natured sort of way, with sometimes Advani ji having to sort of say, cool people down and say, don't worry, it's not all that, it's not going to be the end of the world if you disagree on this matter. But I think what is nice about Malkani ji is that he brought a certain passion. He brought a certain passion into his writings. And it's often said that there is something called a conviction journalist. I personally like to think of myself also as a conviction journalist, where we spend most of our time on opinions, rather than on reportage. And opinions are an important facet of journalism. Some people read, or they used to, people these days sort of peruse the media, that they don't necessarily always read newspapers for different reasons. And it's very difficult to say which one is preeminent. Some people start the newspapers from the back, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you start from the sports pages, there's nothing wrong with that. If you think that's the most important thing, that's fair enough. It is a perfectly legitimate activity. Some people don't bother about the front pages, they move on to the city pages. So what constitutes a newspaper is made up of various types of inputs, and of which opinion is one of them. But what demarcates an editor from just an opinion writer is the certain values he brings to the entire paper, of what it means to be a reporter, what are the values you're conveying, what are the standards, journalistic ethics and standards you're setting for yourself. And that goes regardless of what editorial position you may take, your newspaper, your publication may take or may not take. And I think it's very important to highlight this in today's context, that you can have different perspectives. You can be for the government, you can be against the government, you can be for this, against that, to different positions. But what is the basic idea of fairness you bring to this thing? The sense of integrity, that you don't willfully misconstrue facts, that you don't misquote people, you don't invent quotes, you don't take 3 words out of a sentence and make that something else. There are certain very basic norms which guide journalism, and which are universal in character, and which define this profession in every way. What your opinion is important. How you argue it is equally important. So there is a craftsmanship involved in this. And I think what is very important, especially for people who will at some point in their careers may choose to go into the written word, is that the craftsmanship of how you present an argument, the skills involved in it, the sophistication involved in it, the use of the language which is involved, that plays as much as a role as what is the essence of your argument. So both make for each other. And your ability to write only when you know that it's not necessary to write on everything. One of the occupational hazards in politics is that every now and then someone comes in and thrusts what is called a boom nowadays. I used to call it a microphone. And say, so-and-so has said this, what are your reactions? Now, so-and-so has every right to say whatever he or she feels. It is not obligatory on your part to respond, especially if you don't know what the hell he or she was talking about, or in what context he or she was talking about. So, it is not obligatory to have an opinion on everything. I think one of the tragedies of contemporary journalism or TV journalism is that they've reduced journalists to becoming sound recordists. That you're basically going from place to place. Please give your comments on X. Okay, someone looking at the watch and saying, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or whatever it is, ticket. Thank you. I remember when I was in Times of India, one senior reporter had once gone to a press conference, and I saw his copy. And I said, this is preposterous. I mean, what? He said, but that person has said that. So I said, so are you a stenographer? That you faithfully record what he said? Where is the application of mind? Unfortunately, and I think this is one of the tragedies which maybe a lot of people who might be heading for TV journalism might find, that in the initial years, all you're doing is rushing from one place to another and just recording sound bites. It's a soul-destroying job. It's a very hard work. It's very hard, arduous job, but it's completely a soul-destroying job. But alas, that's what it's come to. Now, the journalism which Malkani ji was familiar with belonged to a very, very different world. It was a world where I remember Atal ji at something or the other had happened, some slightly consequential something or the other happened, and there was it was at a BJP National Executive meeting, and Atalji, people came up to Atalji and said, this has happened, we should perhaps give a reaction. He said, Jaldi kya hai? Kal denge. Now today that's inconceivable. You cannot wait, because for them the news cycle was very different. The papers had gone to bed, raat mein kya reaction denge, kaun lega, no one would carry it. So he could afford to sleep over it and then give the reaction next afternoon perhaps, in time for all the editions to carry it. Today it's not possible. The news cycle is relentless. And that creates complications of its own. That creates complications insofar as it breeds that leisure for reflecting on something, a story, is no longer there. First you get mindlessness, acts of utter stupidity. And I think what highlights the stupidity are the scrolls called breaking news. You have breaking news, so-and-so arrives at some place. If someone is supposed to address a meeting, they have to arrive at some point. But that's not a breaking news, for heaven's sake. But that's and one error committed by one channel is automatically reproduced by everyone else. Because there is that competition. Arey, miss kar gaya. Thirdly, the act of saying sorry has disappeared. And I think this is very sad. Because in this sort of environment, in this very high voltage, high pressure environment, you're bound to make mistakes. You're bound to make mistakes. You're only human. With good intentions, you're bound to make mistakes. Admit the mistakes. The problem arises when you defend a mistake and equate it with the freedom of speech. And I think this is what is happening in a very, very large way in this profession today, and which is the sad thing about it. Mistakes are being made. Admit a mistake. You got it wrong, you may have done it deliberately, but you got caught out. Or you may have unwittingly, some source may have misled you. That can also happen. But you got it wrong. Admit it openly. Take it. We goofed. It was the wrong number. But no. If someone says, you got it wrong, and it's saying you're attacking the very foundations of democracy in India. There is, in certain journalists, an ability to equate their self-interests with the interests of the nation. And I think this highly personalized thing, you can say, I am giving a point of view. That's a fair enough thing. And I will defend my right to give my point of view. This is what Prafullo was talking about on the entire sword of Tipu Sultan incident. It's, I think, a very revealing incident. And I think it's also very revealing that Malkani ji and Ramesh Thapar, both of them stood for very different values. They actually fought a case together to uphold a same principle. Today, most people remember that as Ramesh Thapar versus Union of India. They don't remember Malkani ji's contribution to that. But this whole thing, and this was what in the First Amendment debate was all about. Today, and Prafullo mentioned this very wonderful book which this boy Tripurdaman Singh has written called 16 Fateful Days. It really talks about, it chronicles the history of the debate over the First Amendment. And I think anybody who likes a little pacey reading, but yes, who wants something informative, could do by reading this book. Because the entire genesis of the free speech debate in India can be located to that thing. Now the whole question of free speech which comes up, again, we know that free speech is not absolute. There are legitimate restrictions which people will put. Child pornography is one. Very common. I mean, I'm just giving the most basic of that. There is a complete no-no. A willful incitement to murder is another no-no. Today we've introduced even more something. Hurtful speech against women, for instance, misogynistic speech. There are other things which are very hurtful to particular things. We qualify it. But overall, within the bounds, there is an absolute freedom, a constitutional right, which must be defended, of your right to say anything, as long as you are not willfully slandering someone. That is very important. I can say that Modi ji is wrong by doing X. But I will be committing a gross act of slander if I say Modi ji believes that because he has got money from so and so. This is the same thing as which applies to the judiciary. What is contempt of court? There's a very famous case. In India, the judiciary is a little more rigid in terms of what it sees as a contempt of court rather than what the, say for instance, the British judges think. They have a far more expansive. There was this very famous case of when the judges gave a ruling which went against public opinion in some way or the other. So one, I think it was the Daily Mail, which had carried 12 of these judges who gave that thing and said, 12 silly idiots, 12 old idiots. So someone came up to the Chief Justice and said, you should go and have a contempt charge against that publication. He said, why? There were 12 of us. We are all old. And whether we are idiots or not is a matter of opinion. Well, unfortunately, in India, we don't have such an expansive view of what constitutes contempt of court. But the broad idea that as long as you don't impute motives, again the same thing. So-and-so gave that judgment because he was paid by so-and-so to give such a judgment. As long as you don't say that, you can criticize. But of course, some judges do not appreciate even that. Because like journalism, the quality of judiciary is also very uneven. Now let's get back to this whole thing about why I say the changing environment of journalism. Today, most young people, and this is a global survey, you can look at the Reuters, Oxford's annual survey which they put out. And they do a global survey, and in that global survey, they found that less than 50%, just over 51, just 51% of those aged 35 and below actually are consumers of what might be called traditional media. And by traditional media, you mean print and television. So another half is not. Of course, the figure rises when you go up the demographic scale. But what is important in terms of trends is that today what was constituted the traditional media, in that television and print, are no longer seen as being relevant to their specific individual needs. Now, why is this happening? Is this a global phenomena? I mean, is this something which will continue happening? In India, it's not happening in this way, partly because we are still expanding. Literacy is still expanding in India. So the reach of newspapers is still growing, and particularly English language newspapers have come to a stagnation. But other in language newspapers are still expanding, but not at the rate at which they should have been. The alternatives, sources, there are two big sources of alternative news. In India, it's WhatsApp. And the other is Facebook. More than 300 million of the Indian internet users, active internet users, are about 550, 600 million in India, of which about slightly more than 300 million get their staple source, their primary source of news. They may read a newspaper, but their primary source of news comes from a combination of WhatsApp and YouTube. I'm sorry, it wasn't Facebook, it was YouTube. So the environment has changed. Today, one of the reasons why I can speak about, say, Bengal, where I happen to do a lot of political work, so I can understand. In Bengal, you find one thing, that a large amount of people, particularly in the villages, use their smartphone to get YouTube commentaries, and most of these are opinions, with some amount of news laced in. They get a certain traction partly because the mainstream newspapers do not cover it. So the day the mainstream newspapers get selective about what they cover and obliterate people will, like water, people will find their own source. Secondly, it's no longer possible, and this is where the environment of Malkani days Malkani ji was jailed on the 29th of 25th, 26th of June 1975, and he spent the entire emergency behind jail, not being able to do what he could do, which is right. So the voice of Malkani was not heard during the emergency. And at that time during the emergency, people had to find alternative sources of news, sometimes by tuning on shortwave to a crackling BBC, sometimes from some other place, but mainly by whispers. What is called the Bush telegraph, which also led to a lot of mischief being put in. Inevitable in a situation like that. Today, thanks to technology, it is not possible to suppress anything. It's just not possible. So the freedom of speech, the outlet of speech, today has acquired a very different. So there is a medium. Someone will send it to you on WhatsApp. If someone will give something in YouTube, someone will send you an email. There are other means and methods of it. All sorts of websites exist all over the world. Secondly, thirdly, news is no longer purely local any longer. It has crossed national boundaries. It's become an international thing. The only difference is languages differ. So there is the entire canvas of what is called the media has changed enormously. Now, if you ask the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting what do they think of this, they will say, oh, this is a big threat to us. Because sometimes babus think like policemen. They first look at the threat. The separatists will get to this. The secessionists will get at it. Yes, I'm not denying that they will get at it. They will use it. But unless the whole of India has turned separatists and secessionists, how is the rest of the country going to use it? That's the larger question. If we only look at what the aberrations are going to be, rather than what the main things are going to be, we'll lose sometimes sight of this thing. And to my mind, India presents a huge expanding digital space, the biggest in the world, with a relatively free environment. India constitutes, our internet penetration is just below 50% of the population. It's about 49. It would have been higher, but COVID, I think, took a little toll. And it's exceeded only by China. But 50% is still low compared to what the average in North America and all the others is. In absolute terms, we are far ahead. But in percentage terms, there are countries which have 95%, 96%, that sort of a level. So in India, the scope for expansion is just huge. And with that scope, with that expansion, the digital space is going to expand even further. So media, as we know it, is going to expand in an exponential. Every company now wants inputs. Content, as they call it. That content is basically what is going to shape what is called media. And the nature of content is what you will be providing in some way or the other in the coming days. And now the issue really is, if we see this thing as a threat, we are not going to look at the potential of what will happen if something like, once we reach 75% of the population are internet, and that's not a very long way off. I think in about 5-7 years we might reach that. The galloping speed plus the cost of data is in India is one of the lowest in this country, in this world. Where will that leave us in terms of the media, of the digital space? Unless we can plan ahead to how we can have an authentically Indian digital footprint all over the world, crossing our national boundaries, we will be failing in our duties. We have been thinking too narrowly so far, because we seem to be obsessed with threats. Till we can actually transcend this and move to another plane, I think we will be unfair to the legacy of people like Malkani ji, who actually set the parameters of what a robust, healthy press in India should be. The important thing of Malkani ji is not to only appreciate what he did, but to get the essence of what crusaders like him actually did in terms of founding, in terms of establishing the media and establishing a healthy media in this country. And if we allow it to stagnate to the print and not see the opportunities ahead of us in terms of what it can, in terms of the digital footprints available to us, I think we'll be letting the side down. Media is not something which the newspapers can, which the government can control. It cannot. They can try. It's impossible. Technology is far, it's gone beyond that. Government can try to get revenues out of it, which is a fair, I think, expectation. But to try and control it is out of the question. Control, if any, will have to be exercised by the people who run it themselves. So it's a degree of self-regulation which is there. And because it is a degree of self-regulation, I think it's very important that the positive values, that the wholesome approaches which mark people like Malkani ji, they are imbibed. And I think the best traditions of journalism are actually imbibed, regardless of what the medium is going to be, what the platform is going to be in the future. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and thank you.
थैंक यू सर। मलकानी जी से शुरू करके अतीत और वर्तमान और भविष्य आपने उससे हमें रूबरू कराया है। आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। Now I request Shri Prafull Ketkar ji to please felicitate Shri Swapan Das Gupta ji and Professor Govind Singh ji with the memento. This memento has especially been prepared by organizer. Before requesting Professor Govind Singh ji for vote of thanks, there is one announcement. हॉल के बाहर चाय की व्यवस्था है, इसलिए पीछे I request all our guests and also staff members from organizer to and all our faculty members to join tea at KM Srivastava Lounge. Professor Govind Singh ji.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद प्रोफेसर प्रमोद जी। मुझे औपचारिक तौर पर धन्यवाद के लिए बुलाया गया है, लेकिन थोड़ा सा प्रमोद जी ने कहा कि यदि आप चाहें तो अपने विचार भी दे सकते हैं, तो इसके लिए मैं प्रमोद जी का आभारी हूं। हालांकि इतने अच्छे व्याख्यानों के बाद कुछ बोलने को रह नहीं जाता है, और बहुत ही अच्छे व्याख्यान जो है, और समझिए कि 1947 से लेकर के सन 2000 तक के भारत की एक तस्वीर हमारे सामने रख दी है मलकानी जी के बहाने। तो मलकानी जी के बारे में बहुत कुछ कहा गया। बहुत थोड़े से समय के लिए 2 बार मुझे भी मलकानी जी से मिलने का अवसर मिला। एक बार तो इंटरव्यू लेने के लिए, और एक बार फ़ोन से ही इंटरव्यू लिया गया था। फिर बाद में उनका बेटा भी हमारे साथ काम करता था जी न्यूज़ में, तो इस बहाने से भी एक पारिवारिक टाइप का परिचय उनसे था। तो मुझे जो मुलाकात हुई, जो उनके बारे में देखा, पढ़ा, सुना, उसके हिसाब से ऐसा लगता है कि मलकानी जी एक ऋषि संपादक थे। उनको हम संपादकों की कई कैटेगरीज होती हैं, और भारतीय शब्दों में कहें तो एक ऋषि किस्म के संपादक वो थे, और अंग्रेजी में कहें तो उसको क्लासिक एडिटर कहा जा सकता है। तो ये एक तरह से मतलब इसका मतलब ये है कि एक ऐसा व्यक्ति जो पत्रकारिता को जीता है, पत्रकारिता में रहता है, पत्रकारिता के बारे में ही सोचता है, लिखता पढ़ता है, और मंथन करता है, मनन करता है। तो इस तरह के व्यक्ति, ये जो आज़ादी का दौर था, ये समझिए कि 1990 तक काफ़ी लोग हुआ करते थे, बड़ी हर विचारधारा में, और वैचारिक बेस उनका बहुत ही मजबूत हुआ करता था। उसमें से मलकानी जी एक तरह से राइट विंग के प्रतिनिधि हुआ करते थे, और वामपंथी विचारधारा के निखिल चक्रवर्ती, खास करके 1980 और 90 के दशक में, चूंकि मैंने अपनी पत्रकारिता की नींव रखी, तो उस दौर में वामपंथी विचारधारा में निखिल चक्रवर्ती और सोशलिस्ट विचारधारा में मधुलिमीय संपादक नहीं थे, लेकिन लेखक थे, विचारक थे, और कॉलम लिखते रहते थे। तो ये तीनों ही लोगों से मिलने का मौका मिला, और तीनों ही लोगों में अद्भुत सादगी और बहुत ही सात्विकता जो है देखने को मिलती थी। मैं चूंकि नया रिपोर्टर था, तो मधुलिमीय तो लिखवा देते थे, सवाल पूछो, अच्छा उत्तर लिखो, इस शैली में वो उत्तर दे देते थे, और बहुत ही प्रेम के साथ समझा देते थे। तो इस तरह के संपादकों का भी दौर था, जो वैचारिक पत्रकारिता का दौर था, और धीरे धीरे वैचारिक पत्रकारिता की जगह जो है रिपोर्टिंग वाली पत्रकारिता का दौर आया। जो हमारे स्वपनदा ने कहा भी कि मलकानी जी ओपिनियन के पत्रकार थे, रिपोर्टिंग वाले पत्रकार नहीं थे, लेकिन ओपिनियन वाले ही डोमिनेट करते थे। सच बात यह है कि उस दौर में ओपिनियन की पत्रकारिता, विचार की पत्रकारिता ही डोमिनेट करती थी। 90 के बाद जो है एक तरह से विचारधारा के अंत की घोषणा कर दी गई, तो सब तरफ वैचारिक पत्रकारिता का धीरे धीरे क्षरण होने लगा। तो ये संक्षेप में मैंने उनके बारे में कहा, और अद्भुत पत्रकार, मतलब ऐसे लोग मिलते नहीं हैं, और आज की तारीख में तो बहुत मुश्किल से ढूंढने को मिलते हैं। अब मैं धन्यवाद के बारे में सबसे पहले हमारे आज के जो मुख्य वक्ता हैं, श्री स्वपन दास गुप्ता जी, जो सांसद भी रहे हैं, और मेरा सौभाग्य है कि जिस संस्थान में वो वरिष्ठ संपादक थे टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया में, मैं भी उसी संस्थान में था उस समय, और उनको टाइम्स बिल्डिंग के बहादुर शाह जफर रोड पर जो टाइम्स बिल्डिंग है, उसके 2nd फ्लोर में एक बिल्कुल पारदर्शी केबिन में बहुत जोर जोर से बोलते हुए और ठहाके लगाते हुए हम बाहर से सुनते थे आते जाते हुए। तो काफ़ी बुलंद आवाज़ में वो बोलते थे तब भी, और आज भी बोलते हैं। हालांकि अब आवाज़ थोड़ा और वो हो गई है, क्षीण हो गई है, लेकिन तब उनकी आवाज़ वाकई गजब बोलते थे, और उनका लेखन भी बहुत ही बढ़िया आर्गुमेंटेटिव तरीके से, बहुत ही लॉजिकल अंदाज में वो लिखते हैं, और बहुत ही खूबसूरत भाषा उनकी होती है। उनके बहुत सारे लेखों को अनुवाद करने का भी मौका मिला, अमर उजाला में अनुवाद करवा करके छापने का मौका मिला। बहुत ही खूबसूरत और बहुत ही लॉजिकली अपनी बात को कहने वाले अद्भुत पत्रकार हैं। आपने आज हमारे बीच में आकर के मलकानी जी के बहाने आज की पत्रकारिता के बारे में, बीते हुए कल की पत्रकारिता के बारे में और भविष्य के बारे में बहुत अच्छी तरह से रूपरेखा रखी। आपका बहुत बहुत आभार स्वपनदा। हमारे बीच में दूसरे जो वक्ता हैं प्रफुल्ल केतकर जी ऑर्गेनाइजर के वर्तमान संपादक हैं, और काफ़ी आपने देखा होगा कि जगह जगह टीवी में भी अक्सर तमाम टीवी चैनलों में नवीनतम विषयों पर बोलने के लिए वो बुलाए जाते हैं और हमारा सौभाग्य यह है कि हमारे यहाँ भी वो लगातार आते रहते हैं और हमें टाइम टू टाइम उनका आशीर्वाद मिलता रहता है। पिछले साल मराठी पत्रकारिता का हम लोग कर रहे थे, बहुत कुछ काम कर रहे थे, तो उसमें उनकी हमने बहुत मदद ली। पेपर सेटिंग से लेकर के पेपर के मॉडरेशन तक काफ़ी काम जगह जगह अनेक कदमों पर उन्होंने हमारी मदद की। आपका आज आपके साथ मिल करके हम ये कार्यक्रम कर रहे हैं और आप यहाँ आए, आपका भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। जो किताब आपने संपादित की है वो वाकई हम सब के लिए प्रेरणादायक बनेगी, ऐसा मुझे लगता है। इसके अलावा यहाँ ऑर्गेनाइजर पांचजन्य ग्रुप के कुछ और लोग भी बैठे हुए हैं, मैं उन सब का भी बहुत बहुत हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ। हमारे डायरेक्टर जनरल जो चले गए, जिनको बहुत अर्जेंट काम से जाना था बीच में, उनका भी बहुत बहुत आभार, क्योंकि उनके ही आशीर्वाद से, उनकी ही देखरेख में ये कार्यक्रम हुआ है। और भले ही चले गए हैं लेकिन वो यहाँ रहे जितना भी टाइम था उनके पास, उनका भी बहुत बहुत आभार। हमारे प्रशासन का बहुत बहुत आभार जिन्होंने इस कार्यक्रम को करवाया। हमारे बहुत सारे साथी, हमारे बहुत सारे फैकल्टी मेंबर्स यहाँ, वरिष्ठ और दूसरे फैकल्टी मेंबर्स, एसोसिएट्स, टीचिंग एसोसिएट्स यहाँ पर बैठे हुए हैं। और सबसे ज़्यादा जो धन्यवाद है हमारे नए छात्रों का, नए छात्रों में जो जोश दिखाई पड़ रहा है छात्र छात्राओं में, वो वाकई काबिल तारीफ है। और अंतिम समय तक ये हॉल भरा हुआ है, इससे साबित होता है कि आप लोगों में बहुत कुछ करने का जोश और जज्बा है। इसलिए आप सबका भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। मैं बाकी हमारे तमाम जो साथी लगे हुए इस काम में, खास करके फोटोग्राफर, कैमरामैन और तमाम जो दूसरे साथी जो इसकी व्यवस्था से जुड़े हुए हैं, एस्टेट डिपार्टमेंट के लोग, IT डिपार्टमेंट के लोग, उन सब का भी बहुत बहुत आभार, धन्यवाद।